Well, one talks about lateral thinking, but these whales have certainly extended a lot of people's thinking. There's no question about that at all. And I think there are quite a number of new directions that have been put on the table this afternoon. And there are obviously quite a lot of options that need to be explored. But this is the time for questions, and perhaps, since it's late in the afternoon, to fly some of the crazier suggestions around the table here to see whether in some way over the next period we can't beat this problem. It's an extremely important one. It's critical in many, many areas, and there may be a solution or a mixture of solutions. So let's see whether we can find our way there. Do we have some questions?
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to thank Pablo and John and on Jeff for, I believe, getting to the nitty-gritty. It's a shame we've spent 2 days establishing that we have a problem. That's why we're here. Now we've only got half a day to sort out some solutions to the problems. There's some really good ideas there, and we need some commitment from lots of people moving forward to get hold of these suggestions and start playing with them and communicating amongst ourselves. So yeah, I'd just like to say, you know, that thanks. It's good to see that there's some ideas out there. I have a few of my own, and we always have to start bouncing those around now and solving this problem.
Okay, thanks very much. Just a question from here. You know, I believe the American Navy has hydrophones deployed off their coast. Is that in fact so? And is there any possibility of getting any useful information from that chain of hydrophones? I believe they are military in nature, but I believe in the past they've also recorded some interesting noises. And has anyone in fact seen whether one can make use or get access to that information?
We shed a little bit of light on it. So they do have regular operations and practices out in the Gulf of Alaska, and they do let fishermen know, and we often get nervous about some of that. When depredation awareness became heightened, we asked them to start working with them. We haven't been able to work anything out yet, but it would be interesting to know if while they were out there, if whales weren't around for some reason. Kind of gets into some of the orca saber type stuff or whatever they're doing. So we're trying to work with them. It's a little more complicated working with the military at that level, but it would be wonderful to know that. If anybody else is maybe, you know, I would think maybe even Canada has done some stuff, not with their military, but with some other things with surveying. Might be interesting to look at.
Thanks for that, Jeff. Any further questions?
For biologists, is it possible that orca whales changed their seasons? I mean, we used to have a orca whale season when we were fishing, and now they are all year round. So let me think that maybe they used to go somewhere else looking for food or whatever, but now they just stay there. Is it that possible? That kind of change in their behavior? Paul, please.
Paul, please.
Is it working? Yeah. Well, we don't know much actually about what they do all year round, and yeah, most populations do have a seasonality in their feeding habits. It's possible they can extend this periods, I mean, where they're going to be dedicated to one specific type of prey or not. But so far we don't have the answer for that, yeah, especially in those remote areas where it's impossible to monitor population all year round. But yeah, we can't rule that out, definitely.
Eduardo? Yeah.
Hello. Just a small comment about that. What I have heard from the keepers here is that before the orcas used to be swimming around, and from time to time they found a fishing vessel and then start depredating. But nowadays, it seems that there are some residents, families in specific places. So it would be very interesting the day we really do some photo ID work, because already the crew members, they already know the orcas. Some of them have even names, you know, and they know this one belongs to the family who lives in that place, you know. So I think that it has been, definitely has been a change in habit in the last, I don't know how many years.
Yeah, it all comes back to how predictive the fishery might be if those fishing grounds are, visited by the fishing vessels every year at the same time of the year. Those whales, once they have figured it out, yeah, it's possible that they know that the vessel may come back.
This is something due to our coast and the seabed formation here. I don't remember, somebody yesterday showed a map that I forgot to do it from my company for the places we catch. They have been the same for years, because basically we are following a canyon at a certain depth. So even though we have a big coastline, you know, by 200 miles, but the real fishing grounds are a limited surface. So we keep going there year by year, month by month.
Marta?
Thanks. I think this also goes back to the point that was made earlier about data collection and data analysis. So it's very difficult to answer the questions that you're asking because we don't know. We haven't seen the data, and it might be that this is your perception, but we can't make an objective assessment or reply to this until somebody's actually done the analysis. So maybe that's something to think about, whether that's something you might want to look into doing in the near future. And for example, around South Georgia, we haven't seen an evidence that there has been a massive change of how that moves around during the fishing season. The fishing season is relatively short, but we have a time series of about 12 years now. So without that sort of analysis, it's very difficult to reply to these answers.
Yeah, but my question anyhow was about your feeling, not about the data. I know there is no data about it. I just wanted to say something else. My father had an idea many years ago that maybe the fishing vessel success could depend on the vessel, the crew, the fishing master, or whatever. So he made all the possible combinations. We have 3 vessels that are pretty similar. So but sometimes one fishes a lot more than the other. So maybe that was the fishing master, maybe the captain, the crew, and start making all possible combinations. And the answer is there is no answer. There is no one combination that is success more than the other. I was talking about, I'm saying this because of what Paul said about teaching fishing master to do one or other thing. For our experience, is not related.
Yeah.
There is no correlation between variables. That's what I mean. Thank you.
Jan?
What you suggested in the seasonality is something the Bering Sea fishermen have thought about, because they definitely believe there's a season for those whales, and that if they fished off-season, that it would be in their behalf. We just don't have the data out there to show that and how they should change their fishing behavior. However, in the Gulf of Alaska, we have not out offshore. We have not had killer whales interacting with our gear. They're out there, but they are not the same type of killer whales that will take fish off the gear. They're mostly mammal eaters, so they are primarily mammal eaters in that eastern Gulf area, so we have not had that overlap. However, just south of us in Canada, there are whales that do depredate, and they have not taught the fish eaters in our area. So there's some nuances to the behavior that you need to, like Marta said, if you need to just have the background in the animals to really say what and where, how your management techniques might be best suited. Like the Bering Sea is definitely a place where they could probably do seasonality.
Yeah. Jan, while we're with you, looking at some of these ideas for moving forward here, that's going to require the buy-in of the fishermen, of the people on deck. And
Right.
we've got to somehow or other get the enthusiasm through to them.
Well,
And before you start, Jan, I'm saying, let the men have a chance this time. We have to perhaps give some thought about the way we're going to transmit what happened here, how we actually put it together in a digestible form so we can get the enthusiasm down to the right level. Because, it's no good that it kind of stops here. We communicate with each other, we move ahead at this sort of level, and we don't get that buy-in down at the bottom, because some of the best ideas come from the guys on the deck. And one thing is for certain, if they're not committed, no idea that you come up with is actually going to work. Now, I'm directing my question towards you, Jan, so hang on to the microphone right there. Because in your case, you clearly have an enthusiastic group of committed small fishermen who've already committed themselves to data collection, and I'm quite sure would be very enthusiastic if they were directed in the right way. But there are various other patterns, around the world fisheries. And let's just apply our minds a little bit about how we're going to take some of the inputs that we might be able to feed on further down, how are we going to take that through to the people at deck level? Jan?
all those ideas come from the fleet. They're not coming from the biologist. So the fishermen gave us those ideas, and they say, hey, what about this? What about this? And it's not a perfect world at all by any means. There are some fishermen that don't have buy-in, some do. But we feel it's up to the fleet to get the buy-in from their fellow fleet mates or fellow fishermen. It's not really up to us to do that. There are some bumps in the road. I mean, the network last year we were ready to go out to follow a boat that was just ready to haul his gear, and he asked us not to come near his vessel because he believes that the instruments we were putting in the water were attracting whales. Then they were hydrophones. We were just listening. We weren't attracting. We weren't broadcasting any sound at all. So there's some misconceptions out there, and that's up to us to make those corrections. So we aren't doing things perfectly, but having the fleet buy-in is really a big part of it that we already had from the get-go because it was their idea. So they just brought me into it. So, and that's a little bit different situation, but I just need to think about how we actually secure it, how we get new buy-in from the people that are a little hesitant, and that has been a challenge.
Thanks, Reese.
Just in reply to your comment then, Richard, and yes, there definitely is a big difference between the Alaskan small boats and us, generally our toothfish big boat systems where it's not owner-operator in most parts, it's company-based. And I think there's a lot of countries involved, a lot of different nationalities and boats, so culture will play a big part in it as well. But I think it's probably a top-down thing. So whatever conclusions we come up with at the end of tomorrow, yes, we need to disseminate that in a format that is one good at a regulator's level, at a scientist level, that works for the vessel operators, who can then educate their captains, who can then pass that on to their crew and get buy-in ultimately. So I think a bigger responsibility or a big onus is for the toothfish fleet is on people like yourself and me and Eduardo and the vessel operators who have to sell this to the skippers. And yes, there might be some short-term pain, but it's about the big picture. And if they're serious about a long-term future in the fishery, for example, and creating a stable environment for their crew, a happy crew, I think we have to look at the long-term game, and if you can get buy-in, it's going to make it all the better.
Yeah, Reece, I think you're correct, but I'll take it one step further. I think one of the issues we have is the legislators that make the rules governing our fishery now. I mean, and the Ross Sea is a classic example. Until recently, or even now, we still have a warrant of fitness process where your line is measured and there's a line sink rate and all that sort of thing. We can't deviate from that process for each vessel. And So yeah, our ability to change and try new things is pretty much locked up without a supported paperwork, which means a proper submission. Very hard to do from a deck. So yeah, I think right from the top there has to be an acceptance that somehow we can make quick changes to adapt on a seasonal basis anyway.
Thanks very much. I think the other point, is that a great deal of effort in the past has gone into the pure research, but the actual application on the vessels has sometimes not been quite as well organized. And perhaps we must give some thought to that as Colto as well, to ensure that some of the ideas that got exposure today from the commercial companies also get really full support, so we can try and see whether they work, because many of them clearly are not immediate solutions. They are ideas that will require considerable work, considerable investment, considerable heartache. And a skipper's got to talk to, amongst other things, his bank manager, very often his wife and his crew. It's difficult for him to actually get involved in research. He's got to perform all the time. It's terribly important for him. And we need to perhaps give some thought and some recognition to the people that are going to be going out there and trying some of these ideas. Do we have any more? Going. Dirk?
Yeah, on JB's point, I think a good way to get stuff into Camelot is to have a scientist carry it in for you. So the easiest way to get things done in Camelot, in my view, is to put it in through the working groups, and that's where the scientists go. I think there would be scope for innovation. If that's the sort of thing you want in Camelot, then there is a process there are ways of doing things. But I think one of the key things for me, and looking at the examples that have worked, one of the examples that worked was the way that seabird bycatch was dealt with in Camelot. When you look at what were the key parts of success there, because Camelot was concerned that the amount of albatrosses and petrels that were being caught were actually jeopardising those populations. So they saw that it was well within their mandate to try and manage that issue. And they got together a relatively small group of motivated individuals that included seabird biologists, conservationists, industry, geotechnology people, and so on. And they fixed the problem. There hasn't been an albatross caught in the Camelot area now for many years, whereas there used to be thousands caught. So I think that's the sort of model that's the sort of model we're developing here, sort of sitting down and doing that. But I do think you can't expect to fix a problem in a 2.5-day workshop like this. I think we've scoped the problem much more thoroughly, and I've got a much better understanding of what the realistic options for mitigation are. I think at some stage perhaps Colto needs to think about perhaps setting up some sort of fellowship, actually getting a scientist that can devote a significant part of their career to actually solving this problem. And there are scientists out there that would be eminently able to do that. And I think, given that toothfish isn't a cheap fish, if you were all to get together and sit down and say, well, let's, contribute a couple of $1,000s each from all the different fisheries that are involved in Colto, you could soon set up quite an attractive fellowship that would attract a world-class scientist that could sit down and start to solve some of these problems for you, because you can't do it in 2.5 days. For example, analysing the Chilean data, you could get someone to do that. You could get someone to write some of the generic protocols that you've been asking for with respect to, how do you set up a photo ID guide, although, Nico does that in his part-time, in his spare time. So you could actually start to come up with some products that you could badge as Colto, have scientific credibility because they're developed by a scientist, and then you could disseminate them throughout the toothfish fishing community that way.
Yes, thanks for that. Well, we still have 20 minutes to go, but I must look for the direction here from Reese, perhaps. How do we take it?
Thanks, Richard. Well, I don't think we need to talk for the sake of talking. So if there aren't any more questions, we can break. But Paul is chair for today. Did you have anything else to finish with or to say?
No, I think, well, it's all right. If there are no more questions, we'll be talking further tomorrow morning. We'll be trying to make a summary of what have been discussed so far, but still trying to put some emphasis in what concrete solutions can come out of the discussions, and I'll try to focus on that during the first discussion of the morning.
Quisiera hacer la última reflexión, porque mañana no puedo estar con ustedes. Estoy muy contento y he aprendido mucho durante estos 2 días.
He would like to make one last reflection since he can't come tomorrow. He's very happy with all the learning he has gotten so far.
Mi reflexión dice relación que están todos muy preocupados de la predación, pero mi pregunta es, ¿qué pasa con el recurso? Parto de la base que el recurso está en muy buenas condiciones para que estemos preocupados de estas cosas, cuando yo desde mi otro ángulo podría preocuparme primero cómo está el stock de la población de nuestros recursos, el bacalao en este caso, y después empezaría con la preocupación de ustedes.
So my reflection is, everyone is talking about depredation here in this workshop, but what I'm wondering is, how is the population of the toothfish doing in the Southern Ocean? The biomass of the Chilean bass. Is it in a good state, or is it going down? Does anybody know? Is it stable?
That is a wonderful question. Thank you very much indeed. And I think we may have to turn to a range of people to perhaps give us an overview here. So I'm not sure whether we go by area, but might I suggest we start off with Crozet and Kerguelen? What is the state of the resource?
It's quite stable. It's going up a little bit after the recovery from the IUU fishing in the late 90s.
Okay, that's looking pretty good. Do we have a candidate to speak for South Georgia and the Falklands? Marta?
I can't speak for the Falklands, but I can speak for South Georgia, as that's the assessment that we do. The South Georgian toothfish is in a pretty good state. It's being fished down slowly and controlled to the CAMELA harvest control rules. Sorry, not harvest, the CAMELA decision rules. And I think that is probably the case for many of the research fisheries as well in the CAMELA area. So we have certain decision rules that apply, as Dirk has explained earlier. And I think most fisheries within CAMELA fall into that and fall above that at the moment.
Thank you very much. Can someone speak about
Dirk's
the Ross
gonna give
Sea?
more,
Pardon. Can someone speak about the Ross Sea, perhaps, briefly? Dirk, would you, please?
Yeah, the Ross Sea is, well, it's all Antarctic toothfish pretty much. It's well above the target that's been set by CAMELA. I think it's sitting at about 65, 68% of B0, so it's, certainly not in any sort of strife, and it's, it's on its way to the target quite smoothly. The other sort of exploratory fisheries around East Antarctica and the Amundsen Sea and things like that, the status of those stocks is much less well understood. Amundsen Sea, there's probably the odd seamount population that's under a bit of pressure, but in the bigger scheme of things, probably not that big a deal. East Antarctica copped a lot of illegal gillnet fishing until last year. It's probably not being overfished anymore, but there's probably again spots there that were working so hard that they may be sort of in recovery rather than being in a fish down stage. But you know, the scale of the Camellar exploratory fisheries there are, you know, they're designed to be sufficiently small that they're not going to exacerbate that problem. So generally, and I mean this is reflected in the MSC as well, so Heard Island is above targets, about 65%. At B0, Macquarie Island is the same, uses the same decision rules as Camellar, because that's part of Australian legislation. So pretty much all the Camellar fisheries for toothfish are in reasonable condition. But then, yeah, outside of Camellar, well, I don't know, what's Prince Edward and Marion, where's it at?
Prince Edward and Marion, they've gone up from 450 to 575 tonnes. The signs are reasonable that there's re-establishment of the resource there. So I think if we've more or less gone around the table, the very brief answer is that the
Falkland Islands, it appears to be stable to recovering at a relatively low level. So we're not at historic high levels, but it's stable in relation to the level of fishing effort there is now.
Do we have any other areas we've left out? Because I think the brief answer is that the position is the patient is stable and improving.
Batu or you?
Thank you very much. I am quite happy. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. You can go home happy this evening and not appear tomorrow. Thank you.
What about Chile? Excuse me. What about Chile?
Mamma mia! Sorry. The hosts. I'm sorry, Eduardo.
Me?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, probably there's more people here that should respond to this. But in general, what we have is that IFOP is taking care of all the investigation, and it's very far from our experience. So we have the question that the model is saying one thing, and we are seeing the reality other thing. The model that IFOP uses or works with has been evaluated by peers, that's international peers, that happens each 2 years, I think. And last time, the review was very, very hard. It said that first of all, it says that the work that IFOP has been doing these years is very, very important and have changed everything. But still, there is the model or the results are not good enough to predict the stock or to make plans for management of the resource. So we are, if you ask me, I think we are good. But if you ask someone else here may have another answer. So, Dario, please, if you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, as Eduardo says, the problem that we face is that our current stock assessment analysis has been strongly criticized by an international expert who makes the review of that work. He made around 60 observational recommendations to improve the assessment related with data problems, observational problems, process problems. That means that we have so high uncertainty that, in the words of the reviewer, this work has not been used for advice to management process. So we are in the middle of a process to improve the research, improve the assessment, and we have not achieved a level in which we can trust in the results of current exercises with all different kinds of problems that it has. So formally, I mean, based on the reviewed and questioned document, our fisheries collapsed. But I want to make some clarification about that. Is due our act that doesn't distinguish the different level of exploitation of one stock. Our act recognizes the MSY level in which a fishery is fully exploited, then overexploitation in a range, and suddenly in the limit level it says that the fishery is collapsed. Maybe in Spanish could be not clear that difference, but internationally say that the fishery is collapsed is very hard, which is not the situation of our fishery, but unfortunately we cannot prove that yet. So that's why it's very important, for instance, this workshop, in order to address one of the several problems that we are facing in order to gain more knowledge about processes that affecting our stock, the connectivity problems that we have, the distribution, etc. And then I will say that we have not a status, but if you go to the official documents, you will find that. But I strongly recommend that you have a critic view of that documents, because all the things that I have told.
Yes.
That is the main thing that I can say.
Yes. Thank you. Please.
A last statement. It's that I had never seen a collapsed fishery where there was CPUE is going up, and the size of the fish we're catching is every day larger, and we are not seeing any juveniles or anything. So it's hard to believe that a fishery like that might be collapsed.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Are there any further comments? Because good. Are we done? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.